My boyfriend called my gratitude to my parents' codependency, then smashed my grandmother's vase, while living in their paid-off house. First, I want to apologize because this might be a long one. I'm honestly panicking a little and I need advice. I want to give some background on everyone involved first. Both my boyfriend and I are doctors. I finished residency last year. While he is still in residency, we met at the hospital where we work. Today we got into a huge fight after he saw me buying plane tickets for my parents to come visit me. Both of my parents were doctors too. They made a lot of money, especially with both of their incomes combined, but we always lived like a middle-class family. While their friends and co-workers bought beautiful properties, sometimes more than one, and drove luxury cars, our home was a normal suburban house and our life was fairly simple. My parents have always been frugal when it comes to spending money on themselves. Every month they sent money to family in Mexico and donated to charity. When I started middle school, they began working with Doctors Without Borders. By the time I was 16, they brought me along on medical missions so I could understand how fortunate I was. Traveling was the one thing they truly enjoyed spending money on. Before I turned 18, I had visited so many countries and learned more than I ever could have in a classroom. Even then though, we traveled carefully. They could have afforded luxury hotels but they never saw the point. More recently, they started using Airbnb rentals instead. My mom does collect handbags, though. I remember catching her looking at Louis Vuitton bags online once. One of them was around $1,000, and I asked why she didn't just buy it for herself. She told me it didn't make sense to spend that much money on something only for her. I remember telling myself right then that when I finally made it, buying her one would be the first thing I did. Another thing my parents never hesitated to spend money on was me. When I was in college, I casually mentioned that my back hurt, and they bought me a Tempur-Pedic mattress. I never even asked for one. They bought me a new car when I started college, and their support allowed me to study abroad. I started working part-time because I didn't want to take advantage of them. They were already covering my tuition and rent. All I had to pay for were utilities and food, so with their help, I was able to build up a lot of savings. Once I started medical school, I couldn't work nearly as much. Still, they continued supporting me when I finally finished school and began residency. They retired and moved back home to Mexico. Their retirement funds and savings are enough for them to live comfortably without needing any financial help from me. They let me keep our house, which is completely paid off. I only have to cover the property taxes and utilities. It's a 4-bedroom home, so my boyfriend and 3 other people live with me. We split the property taxes and utilities, and my share comes to around $400 a month. When you're a resident, you really do not make much. It's enough to survive but not much beyond that. Since I live in an expensive city, paying only $400 a month makes a massive difference. Now, here's where the problem starts. I'm incredibly grateful to my parents. While so many of my colleagues are carrying around $200,000 in debt, I barely have any loans. I have always wanted to give back to them because of everything they did for me. So, when I finished residency and began making a real salary, I finally bought my mom a Louis Vuitton purse. I bought my dad a helicopter toy he had always liked too. Then I took both of them out for a nice fancy dinner. When I gave them their gifts, my mom started crying and told me to return the purse because it was too much. I told her she had to keep it, and that I would be offended if she didn't. We ended up having a really emotional heart-to-heart. I told them that I am who I am because of them, and they told me how proud they were of me. When I told my boyfriend about it afterward, all he said was, she's so emotional. To be fair, my mom does cry easily, but it still hurt hearing him dismiss such an important moment like that. Sometimes if I have extra money after my important expenses, shopping and savings, I will randomly send my parents cash. I tell them to use it on themselves and do something fun. I know I will not always be able to do that. If I have a family someday, they will come first. My parents have told me that themselves, but I want to do this while I can. It makes me happy to be able to give them something after everything they gave me today. My boyfriend and I got into a massive fight because he saw me buying plane tickets for my parents to visit. He told me I had already bought myself a ticket to see them, so why did I need to buy tickets for them to come here too? He said that should be their expense. It's true that they can technically afford it, but since they live on retirement money, they can probably only afford to see me about once a year. I want to see them more often than that. He told me my parents had created a spoiled, rotten child, and said they enabled me by giving me so much. That confused me because whenever I do something for my parents, he says they are codependent and that helping me was simply their job as parents. I called him a hypocrite. I told him he is basically benefiting from my parents too, because he lives in the house they paid for. I told him that if he dislikes it so much, he is welcome to move out and pay $2,000 a month for an apartment like everyone else. He is staying at a hotel tonight, but he said he will come home tomorrow morning. I genuinely do not know what I'm supposed to do after a fight like this. There was a lot of yelling, and during it he destroyed a sentimental vase my grandmother made for me. That vase meant so much to me, and seeing it broken made something inside me crack too. I am sitting here in tears because he is the first serious boyfriend I have had in a very long time. I keep wondering whether couples therapy could help, or whether this is something I should not even try to fix. My roommate and best friend just came home, and I finally told her everything that happened. As I explained it, she pointed out several red flags in my boyfriend's behavior that I had never noticed before. We're going out now to talk more, because I need to clear my head and figure out what I have been ignoring. Update 1. My best friend came home while I was still trying to process everything that had happened. I told her the whole story, and she said she honestly wasn't that surprised. We decided to go talk at a small bar nearby, and once we were settled in with drinks, she admitted there had been a lot of things about him she never liked. She was actually surprised I had dated him in the first place. There is no denying that he is ambitious. While I had a lot of things come easily to me, he didn't. He depended on nobody to get where he is today, and I have always admired that about him. But my best friend told me he is also an incredibly intense person. At the hospital, he is apparently very difficult to work with. If an intern makes even a small mistake, he asks what school they graduated from. If it is a prestigious school, he will flat out say, "What, do they take anybody now?" If it is a lower tier school, he says, "Well, no wonder why." At one point he even made an undergraduate volunteer cry. She said he is just as hard to live with at home. If my roommates cook something, they usually eat first and wash the dishes afterward. But if he sees them eating while dishes are still sitting out, he has to say some things like, "Wow, there are some lazy people here," or "Do I have to wash everything?" According to her, even leaving a single fork out can become an issue with him. I'm not proud of this part, but I got angry at her for a minute. I was drunk by then, upset, and apparently needed someone to blame. I asked why she had let me waste my time with someone like that without warning me about all those red flags. She told me those had seemed like minor issues at the time. She did not want to interfere over something that felt trivial, especially when I seemed happy with him. But she said this fight was not trivial. She told me it was not something I should just let go. Then she suggested we get more wine and pack up his things. Honestly, it was weirdly fun. We were both drunk, trying to cram all of his stuff into one small suitcase, and we spent more time laughing than actually packing. It helped take the edge off everything I was feeling. The next day he came home. By then, I was about 85% sure I wanted to break up with him, but I still wanted to hear what he had to say. People make mistakes sometimes, and I really believe that how someone handles those mistakes can show whether they are worth keeping in your life. Before he came home, he kept texting me about how sorry he was that I had taken his criticisms the wrong way. He said it was actually good that someone criticized me instead of kissing my ass like everyone else. So, not really an apology, but when he saw the suitcase, suddenly he started apologizing and saying he was wrong. Have you ever heard a child apologize when they are only saying the words they know their parents want to hear? That voice where they just want it over with? That was exactly how he sounded. Then there was this silence, and I finally asked, "Well, what about the vase?" He said, "What about the vase?" I just looked at him. I did not explain because he should have known exactly what I meant. I waited for him to say something. Finally he said, "Okay, I'm sorry, that was mean. Maybe we can take the pieces, dull them down, and make them into a charm bracelet." I told him that if I wanted a bracelet, I would have asked for one. I did not say it out loud, but I actually kind of liked the charm bracelet idea. Still, I liked the thought of turning the broken pieces into a mosaic more. It felt more like preserving what it had been, instead of turning it into something completely different. There was another uncomfortable silence before I finally said, "You know how annoying it is when I try to do something nice for my parents, and there's always someone right beside me shaking his head or making rude comments. You take away the whole moment when you do that." He said, "Yeah, I can see how that's annoying. I'm just worried that if we get married, you'll always have your family. Your parents always sent money to their parents, and I didn't want that to be something I have to look forward to. It can become a burden." I told him I did not believe that was really the reason. And even if it was horrible to think of helping family members as some kind of burden. I said, "You know full well that my parents don't need our help. If anyone was going to be a burden, it would be you and your loans." I know that sounds awful, but I was getting genuinely angry by that point. He told me that was exactly the problem. He had loans, and I didn't. He said I had just been lucky my entire life. I told him, "I know I'm lucky. I'm glad you recognize that I'm lucky. So what is the problem?" But he kept going. "Do you think you would have been a doctor without your parents' help? Maybe you got into school because of their connections." I told him that if I were going to use my parents' connections, I would have tried to get into his school or my parents' schools. He and my parents had gone to prestigious medical schools, while I went to an average one. He replied that this was the difference between us. He was ambitious and refused to settle for less, while I was apparently content with an average school. It was like talking to a brick wall. Either I was using my parents for connections, or I was not ambitious enough. There was no possible answer I could give that would not be twisted into something against me. By that point, I was exhausted. I was hungover, emotional, and his voice sounded like nails scraping across a chalkboard. I told him to leave and said I would have one of our mutual friends bring him the rest of his stuff. He asked me if we were really breaking up over this, and told me that he cannot help feeling that way. He said he would try not to voice his issues about my parents next time, but I told him I cannot be around him knowing he is silently thinking negative things whenever we are with my family. Even if he keeps it to himself, I will see it all over his face. I honestly do not understand what his problem is or where this insecurity is coming from. If anyone looked at us on paper, he is absolutely the more interesting person. He went through a lot as a teenager, graduated at the top of his class, and took part in all kinds of projects and charity work. Nobody has ever denied any of that. I just do not understand why he feels like he constantly has to prove himself. I am, on the other hand, a pretty typical medical school applicant. I got good grades and did the things required to get in, but I do not have the kind of accomplishments that set me apart from every other applicant the way his do. Honestly, I would have been happy attending a Caribbean school as long as I could still match into a residency. So, yes, we broke up. He texted me a few times afterward, but I have not responded. Then he sent me, it's illegal to kick someone out without notice. I was not sure what to do with that part of the situation, so I knew I needed to look into it. Thankfully, he only said it to get a reaction out of me. As far as I know, he is staying with a friend now. Update 2. His text about it being illegal to kick him out got under my skin, mostly because it sounded so calculated. He knew I would worry about doing something wrong. I did not change the locks, throw his things outside, or do anything dramatic. His suitcase was packed because he had left for a hotel and then told me he was staying with a friend. But he had been living in the house for over a year, contributing money every month, and I did not want to accidentally create a bigger problem, because I was angry. I contacted an attorney through the hospital's employee legal benefit. The conversation was embarrassingly practical. The attorney asked whether he received mail at the house, whether he had a key, whether he paid rent, and whether there was anything in writing about our living arrangement. There was not. Technically, he had been paying his share of the property taxes and utilities, but we all knew it was basically rent. The attorney told me not to touch his remaining things without documenting everything, not to change the locks while he still had a right to access the house, and to give him formal written notice instead of trying to handle it through emotional texts. It made me feel sick that it had come to that. Not because I wanted him back, but because it was suddenly so official. I had gone from planning a visit with my parents to writing out a notice telling the person I thought I might eventually marry that he needed to move out. I sent it to him that afternoon. I kept it short and polite. I told him he could arrange a time to collect the rest of his belongings, preferably while one of my roommates or I was home. I also told him that all communication needed to stay in writing for now. He responded almost immediately. He said I was making this ugly, and that I was treating him like some kind of criminal. Then he said he had never felt welcome in the house anyway because it was always my parents' house and never ours. That part honestly made me laugh, which felt strange considering how upset I had been the day before. It is my house. My parents gave it to me, yes, but it is legally mine. He had lived there for a fraction of what he would have paid anywhere else in the city. I had never asked him to pay for repairs, insurance, furniture, or anything major. The only reason it had apparently become our house in his mind was because he wanted the benefits of that without having to acknowledge where those benefits came from. Then he sent another message saying that he wanted to come by that night. I told him no, one of my roommates was not home, and I did not want to be alone with him after the way he acted during our fight. He argued for almost an hour about it. He kept saying there was nothing to be afraid of and that he would never hurt me. The fact that he even had to say that made my stomach turn. Eventually, one of our mutual friends agreed to come over the next evening while he picked up his things. I took pictures of everything that was left in his room before putting it into boxes. It felt ridiculous, like I was preparing for a court case over clothes, textbooks, and a coffee maker. But after the vase, the threat about being kicked out, and the way he had twisted every conversation, I did not trust him to be reasonable anymore. He came the next day exactly on time. He barely looked at me when he walked in. He went straight to his room and started putting things into boxes. At first it was quiet except for drawers opening and closing, then he started making little comments under his breath. Must be nice to have people clean up after you. I guess this is what happens when someone has never had consequences. My roommate was sitting at the kitchen table the entire time pretending to work on her laptop. I was standing by the hallway because I did not want him going through the rest of the house. At one point he picked up the small framed photo I had on my nightstand of my parents and me during one of our trips when I was younger. He stared at it for a few seconds and said, "This explains a lot." I asked him to put it down. He smiled in this weird way and asked whether I was really going to throw away a relationship because he had pointed out the truth. I told him the relationship ended because he broke something that mattered to me, insulted my parents, insulted me, and then tried to make me feel guilty for asking him to leave. He said, "No, it ended because nobody has ever told you no before." Then he put the picture back down too hard. It did not break, but the frame fell over. That was when my friend stepped in and told him to finish packing. He did. He took everything except a few random things that I had not even realized were his. When he left, he handed his key to my roommate instead of me. I do not know if that was supposed to be another little power move, but it just made everything feel even more childish. I thought that was going to be the end of it for the night. About 20 minutes later, my mom called me. She sounded confused, not upset. She asked why my ex had sent her a message saying he was worried about me. At first I thought she meant he had sent some vague breakup apology, but then she read part of it to me. He told her that I had become irrational after our fight. He said he had been trying to help me become more independent from my parents, but that I was not ready to hear it. He also said that he hoped my parents would encourage me to talk to him before I made a decision that I would regret. Then my mom told me there was one more message he sent after that. Update 3. The message was worse than I expected, mostly because it was written in a way that sounded calm and reasonable if someone did not know him. He told my mom that he was concerned about changes in my behavior. He said I had been drinking more than usual, making impulsive financial decisions, and isolating myself from people who challenged me. He brought up the night my best friend and I packed his suitcase, even though he was not there for most of it. He said he was worried that I was surrounding myself with people who encouraged me to make emotional decisions. Then he said something that made my mom go quiet for a second before she read it to me. He wrote that he knew I had always depended on my parents financially and emotionally, and that the breakup had happened because he was trying to help me separate from them in a healthy way. He said he hoped they would look past their initial anger, and encourage me to have a conversation with him before I made a permanent mistake. My mom asked whether he had ever seemed worried about me before this. I told her no. If anything, he had always criticized me for being too close to them, too grateful to them, too willing to let them help me. The only time he had ever acted concerned about my drinking was when he was trying to use the fact that my friend and I had wine while packing his things against me. My mom did not yell or say anything dramatic. She just said, "That is not concern. That is him trying to get access to you through us." Then she told me he had also messaged my dad. My dad had not responded yet because he was in the middle of something when the message came through, but my mom forwarded it to me. It was almost identical, except it was more direct. He told my dad that he respected him as a doctor and as a father, and that he hoped he would understand that I was acting out of anger. He also mentioned the house. He said he had contributed substantially to the household for over a year, and that he felt I was using my parents' money and property to control the situation. That part made my dad furious. My dad has always been the calmer one between my parents. My mom cries easily, gets emotional, and will immediately start worrying about whether everyone is okay. My dad is usually the person who steps back and looks at things logically, but when he heard that, he called me right away. He asked whether my ex had ever paid for repairs, insurance, property taxes beyond his share, or anything related to the house other than what the roommates all paid. I told him no. My dad asked whether he had ever suggested putting anything in writing or taking on any responsibility for the house. Again, no. Then my dad said he was going to respond to him. I asked him not to get dragged into it. I did not want this to become some huge argument between my family and my ex. But my dad told me he was not going to argue. He was only going to make one thing clear. My ex was not to contact either of my parents again. A few minutes later, my dad sent me a screenshot of what he wrote. It was short. He said that my ex had no reason to contact them about a private relationship issue, that he trusted me to make my own decisions, and that any future communication needed to go directly through me or my attorney regarding his belongings. My ex did not respond to my dad. He did respond to me. He said he could not believe I had gotten my parents involved, and that it proved everything he had been trying to explain. I stared at that message for a long time because he was the one who had contacted them. He was the one who sent them messages about me without telling me. Somehow, in his version of events, my parents responding to him was evidence that I was dependent on them. I did not answer. The next morning, I went to work early because I had a long shift, and I just wanted to stay busy. I was hoping that seeing patients and doing something normal would help. It was awkward at first, because we work in the same hospital, but we are not on the same service right now. I had not seen him since he came to get his things. Around lunchtime, one of the nurses pulled me aside and asked whether everything was okay. Apparently he had been in the physician lounge earlier that morning and made a comment about how some people have life handed to them and still find a way to play victim. He did not say my name, but he said it while talking to another resident who knows both of us. I was embarrassed before I was even angry. I hated the idea of people at work knowing anything about this. I already felt like I had made such a mess of my personal life, and now he was bringing it into the one place where I needed to be focused and professional. Later that afternoon, I got a message from one of the residents on his team. She asked if I had broken up with him because he had apparently been telling people that I kicked him out without warning and kept his belongings from him. She said she did not know what was true, but she thought I should know he had been talking about it. That was when I finally contacted the attorney again. The attorney told me to keep screenshots of everything, including the messages to my parents and anything related to him discussing me at work. She also suggested I notify hospital HR before it became a bigger issue, especially since we work in the same building, and he had already tried to contact my family after I asked for communication to stay in writing and only be about moving out. I did not want to report him. The thought of sitting in an office and explaining our breakup to HR made me feel sick. But I also did not want to wait until he said something worse or tried to turn this into some story where he was being mistreated. So I emailed HR and asked for a confidential meeting. They responded much faster than I expected. The meeting is tomorrow morning. Then about an hour ago, while I was trying to get ready for bed, I received a notification from the security camera at the front door. Update 4. I opened the security camera notification expecting it to be one of my roommates coming home or a package being dropped off. Instead, it was him. It was locked. He stood there for a few seconds without moving. Then he looked directly at the camera. I do not know whether he had forgotten it was there, or whether he just did not care, but seeing him look up at it made my entire body go cold. He did not knock. He did not call me. He walked back down the porch, pulled something out of his jacket pocket, and slid it through the mail slot. Then he left. I watched the footage 3 times before I even went downstairs. I called my roommate first. She was out with friends and I did not want her walking into something without knowing. Then I called the non-emergency police number. I felt ridiculous doing it, especially because he had technically not done anything violent and he had left by then. But I told them he had recently moved out, had been contacting my parents and people at work, and had just come to the house without telling me after I had specifically said all communication needed to be in writing. The officer who spoke to me was calm. He told me that because he had left voluntarily and did not try to force his way in, there was not much they could do at that moment. But he said I should save the camera footage, document the time, and contact them again immediately if he returned or refused to leave. He also told me I could look into a trespass notice once I confirmed with my attorney that he no longer had any tenant rights. After I got off the phone, I went downstairs with my roommate on FaceTime. The envelope was still sitting just inside the mail slot. It had my name written on the front in his handwriting. There was no stamp or return address, just my name. I did not open it right away. I stared at it for probably 10 minutes, which sounds stupid now. It was just an envelope. But after everything with my parents and work, I was scared it was going to be another message explaining why all of this was somehow my fault. Eventually I opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the written notice I had sent him to move out. He had highlighted the part where I said all communication needed to remain in writing. On the bottom he had written, "You wanted it in writing, here it is." There was also a letter. At first it sounded almost normal. He wrote that he had been thinking about our relationship and that he understood why I was upset. He said he should not have broken the vase, should not have contacted my parents and should not have talked about me at work. For about half a page, it almost sounded like an actual apology. Then it changed. He wrote that he had been under a lot of pressure and that I had never understood what it was like to have to work for everything. He said I had weaponized the house against him because I knew he had nowhere affordable to go. He said my parents had raised me to believe that money could solve every problem, and that I had used my financial advantage to punish him for being honest. Then he wrote that he had been trying to help me before I made mistakes that would follow me professionally. That sentence made me stop reading for a second. The rest of the letter was about work. He wrote that people had noticed I was emotional lately, that I had been drinking, and that I had made a hostile home environment for him while he was in residency. He said he did not want to hurt my career, but that he could not stay quiet if I continued spreading a false story about him. There was no direct threat, nothing specific enough that I could point to and say he was blackmailing me, but it was clearly meant to scare me. At the very end he wrote that he hoped I would come to my senses before HR became involved. The problem is that HR is already involved. He does not know I requested the meeting. I emailed the letter and the camera footage to the attorney that night. She replied early this morning and told me not to respond to him at all. She said the letter was important because it showed a pattern of him trying to pressure me through my family, the house, and now my job. She also told me to bring everything to HR exactly as it happened, without trying to explain his motives or diagnose him or make it sound more dramatic than it was. My HR meeting was this morning. I expected it to be one person asking me whether I felt safe around him. Instead there were 2 people there, someone from HR and someone from the Graduate Medical Education office. They already knew we had been dating because we had disclosed it when we first started seeing each other. They asked whether he had ever supervised me directly, whether he had access to any of my patient information, whether he had ever tried to contact me through the hospital system, and whether I was concerned about running into him during shifts. I told them everything. I showed them the messages to my parents, the messages about the house, the comments he made while collecting his things, the texts he sent afterward, the messages from the residents who said he had been talking about me, the security footage, and the letter. The woman from HR barely reacted while she read everything. That was probably her job, but it made me nervous. The person from Graduate Medical Education asked whether I had told anyone else that he broke the vase during our fight. I said my roommate knew because she saw the pieces afterward, and my best friend knew because I told her that night. Then he asked me whether I had pictures of it. I did. When I was taking pictures of his belongings before he picked them up, I had also taken pictures of the vase. I did not know why at the time. I think part of me just wanted proof that it had existed before it was broken, because I knew he would eventually act like it was not a big deal. The meeting lasted almost an hour. They told me they were going to look into whether he had been discussing me at work, and whether any schedule adjustments could be made so we would not be in the same areas unnecessarily. They said they could not tell me whether anyone else had complained about him, but the way they looked at each other when I mentioned the comments to interns made me feel like this was not the first time his name had come up. Before I left, the HR woman asked whether I had access to the hospital's employee assistance program. I said yes. Then she told me there was one more thing I needed to know. Update 5. The HR woman told me that before I had contacted them, he had already submitted a concern about me through the hospital. She was careful about how she explained it. She said she could not give me every detail immediately, because they still had to review it, but she wanted me to know it existed before I heard anything through someone else. I just sat there for a second because none of that had anything to do with work. The woman from graduate medical education asked whether I had ever come to work under the influence of alcohol, used alcohol during a shift, or missed any responsibilities because of drinking. I said no to all of it. I have never done anything like that. I drank wine at home on a night off, after a fight with my boyfriend. That was it. They asked whether he had ever seen me drink at work events or whether there was any chance he could have interpreted something differently. I said we had attended normal resident events together before, but nothing recent. He had not even been there the night I drank with my friend. He only knew because he came home the next morning and saw that we had packed his things. The HR woman wrote something down and asked what day that it happened. When I told her, she looked at the schedule on her computer. Then she asked whether I had been working the next morning. I said yes, I had been on a long shift. She asked what time I arrived. I told her I had gone in early, around 6:30 a.m., because I did not want to sit in the house alone after everything that happened. She pulled up my badge records and confirmed that I had entered through the employee garage at 6:21 a.m. Then she asked whether he had been working that day too. I did not know. We were not on the same service, and I had been trying not to think about where he was. She checked his schedule. He had been off that morning. That was when she finally told me the part that made everything feel different. His report said that he had personally observed me arriving at work visibly impaired the morning after drinking. He claimed I looked unsteady and smelled like alcohol. He wrote that he had not reported it immediately because he was trying to deal with the situation privately, but he had become concerned after I escalated the breakup and started making allegations about him. The thing is, he could not have seen me arrive that morning. He was not scheduled to be there. He had been staying with his friend. And even if he had come into the hospital for some reason, he would have had to know exactly when and where I was arriving. I had not told him my schedule. The woman from HR did not say he was lying. She just said they were documenting the timeline carefully. She told me they had reviewed my attendance, my patient care records from that day, and the fact that none of my supervisors, nurses, residents or patients had raised any concerns. She said there was no action being taken against me at that time. But she also said they had to take any report involving possible impairment seriously, even if the circumstances around it were concerning. I asked whether he would be told that I had reported him first. She said he would be told there was an ongoing workplace review involving allegations of unprofessional conduct and unwanted contact, but they would not give him all of my documentation. They were also going to speak with the resident who had heard him making comments in the physician lounge, as well as the resident who messaged me about him telling people I had kicked him out without warning. The person from graduate medical education told me they were moving him off any rotations that could overlap with mine for now. He said it was not a punishment or a final decision about anything. It was just meant to prevent more contact while they looked into it. I asked whether I should be worried about my own program finding out. He said my program director would be informed only that there had been a personal situation involving another resident and that HR had confirmed there were no current concerns about my patient care or professional performance. That should have made me feel better, but it did not. I have worked so hard to build a reputation at the hospital. I am not perfect, but I show up. I do my job and I care about my patients. The idea that he could put something like this into the system because I would not take him back made me feel physically sick. After the meeting, I went straight to my car and called the attorney. She told me not to contact him, not to confront him about the false report, and not to post or say anything about it to mutual friends. She said the timing mattered, especially because he had made the report after I asked him to stop contacting me and after he had already started bringing up drinking in his letter. Then she asked me a question I had not thought about. She asked whether he had ever had access to my phone. At first I said no, because he never knew my passcode. But then I remembered that a few months ago, when my phone screen had cracked during a shift, he had taken it to the repair place for me. He had picked it up too, because I was stuck at the hospital late. He had the phone for most of a day. I told the attorney that, and she asked whether I used any calendar apps that showed my work schedule. I do. My schedule is synced to my phone calendar. I opened it while I was still sitting in the parking garage, and I saw something I had never noticed before. Under the list of devices connected to my calendar account, there was one device I did not recognize. Update 6, the device was listed as an iPad. I do not own an iPad. I called the attorney again from the parking garage. She told me to take screenshots before removing it, change my password from a different device, turn on two-factor authentication, and contact the hospital IT department immediately because my work schedule was connected to that calendar. The IT person I spoke with was surprisingly serious about it. My calendar was technically personal, but it included hospital rotation information, call schedules, and some meeting invitations. He asked whether anyone else had ever had physical access to my phone or laptop. I told him about the repair shop and how my ex had picked up my phone afterward. He checked the device information with me over the phone. The iPad had been added to my account the same week my screen was repaired. I did not know what to say for a minute. It was such a small thing compared to the vase, the messages to my parents, the letter and the false report to HR, but it made all of those things feel less random. He had not somehow guessed when I was working. He had been able to see it. The IT person told me to remove the device immediately. I did. Then he had me change the password for my email, calendar, cloud storage, and hospital-related accounts. He also checked whether there had been any suspicious logins to my work email. There had not been. He said that was good, but he still documented the call because my schedule information could have been accessed through the calendar. After that, I sent the screenshots to my attorney and HR. HR asked me to come back in that afternoon. This time there were 3 people in the room: the HR woman, the person from graduate medical education, and someone from hospital security. They had already interviewed the resident from the physician lounge and the resident who had messaged me. They had also spoken to my roommate, because she had been present when he collected his things. They did not tell me every detail of what everyone said, but they told me enough. The resident from the lounge confirmed that my ex had made comments about me being spoiled, emotional, and unable to handle criticism. The other resident confirmed that he had told people I kicked him out without warning and kept his belongings from him. My roommate confirmed that he had been allowed to collect his things, that she was there the whole time, and that he made comments about me and my parents while packing. Then the person from graduate medical education told me they had confronted him about the impairment report. He apparently tried to say he had come in on his day off to study and happened to see me in the garage. But he could not explain why he had never mentioned that before. He also could not explain why his report said he had personally observed me smelling like alcohol when he was not able to identify where he had supposedly spoken to me or how close he had been to me. They asked him directly whether he had access to my schedule. At first he denied it. Then they showed him the screenshots of the unknown device connected to my calendar account, including the date it was added. They told him the device information would be preserved and reviewed by IT. That was when he admitted he had synced my calendar to his iPad. He said he had done it for convenience when he picked up my phone from the repair place. He claimed he wanted to know when I was free, because our schedules were difficult. He said he had forgotten it was still connected. HR asked why he was checking it after we broke up. He said he was worried about me. The person from graduate medical education told me that answer did not help him. They would not tell me whether he was being terminated or disciplined that day. They said there were formal processes they had to follow, especially because he was still in residency. But they told me he was being placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. He was not allowed to contact me, my parents, my roommates or anyone in my program. He was also not allowed to come to the house. The security person explained that the hospital could issue a no-contact directive for workplace-related conduct, but it did not cover my home. My attorney had already started helping me with a separate civil protection order, based on the camera footage, the letter, the contact with my parents, the false report, and the calendar access. My ex sent me one more message that evening before the hospital directive was formally delivered to him. He wrote, "I did not hack you. You always make everything sound worse than it is." I did not respond. I forwarded it to my attorney. 2 days later, the court granted a temporary protection order. He was ordered not to contact me directly or indirectly, not to contact my parents, and not to come within a certain distance of my house or workplace. A police officer served him because he was no longer staying at the friend's apartment listed on the paperwork. He had moved in with his brother in another part of the city. My parents came to visit the following week anyway. I almost canceled their trip because everything felt like too much, but my mom told me they had already packed. My dad said they were not coming to rescue me or make decisions for me. They were coming because I had bought them plane tickets and they wanted to see their daughter. When they arrived, my mom brought the Louis Vuitton purse I had bought her. I thought she was giving it back again at first, but she pulled it out of its dust bag and showed me that she had been using it. She said she had saved it for special occasions at first, but then she decided that was stupid. She told me she used it to go grocery shopping now. My dad spent most of the first day fixing things around the house that did not need fixing. He tightened cabinet handles, replaced a loose outlet cover, and reorganized the garage. My mom cooked enough food for all 4 roommates and kept asking whether everyone was eating enough. A few weeks after that, HR contacted me with the final outcome. They told me the investigation found that he had made a false report about my alleged impairment, improperly retained access to my personal calendar after our relationship ended, discussed private relationship issues with coworkers in a way that created a workplace problem, and contacted my family, despite being told not to. He was dismissed from the residency program. I asked whether he would be able to transfer somewhere else. The person from graduate medical education told me that was not something they could discuss with me. He only said the program had reported the findings through the appropriate channels. The final hearing for the protection order happened about a month later. My ex appeared with an attorney. He looked completely different from the person who used to sit at my kitchen table complaining about dishes. He barely looked at me. His attorney argued that the calendar access had been accidental, that the messages to my parents came from concern, and that the letter had been emotional but not threatening. My attorney presented the timeline. The copied notice through the mail slot. The messages to my parents, the comments at work, the false impairment report, the hospital record showing he had not been scheduled the morning he claimed to have seen me, the device connected to my calendar after he had possession of my phone. The judge asked him directly whether he had continued accessing my calendar after we broke up. He said yes. The judge granted the protection order for 1 year. After court, my attorney walked me back toward the parking lot. She told me he had been ordered to surrender any copies of my information, remove every account connected to me from his devices, and have his attorney confirm it in writing. A few days later, the confirmation arrived. The last thing I did was take the broken pieces of my grandmother's vase to a local artist, who makes mosaics. I showed her an old picture of the vase sitting on my bookshelf before it broke. She looked through the pieces carefully and told me she could preserve the painted flowers from the front.